So we first started as a recognition to give everyday people the ability to put investment in stuff they actually care about. Because usually you have to be an accredited investor, which means you're very rich, which is not the majority of people to move things forward. And now from that, we pivoted to really focusing on being able to create not just these investment opportunities, but new products and companies in this frontier of tech, which is very real today. My dream scenario, and something I'm hoping to work on at Cult as well, is eventually you'll be able to have a, a vertical farm, but have it mean much more than just fruits and vegetables. That the farm on the corner of your street includes the grocery store and where it's produced.
Hey everyone, I hope you're having a great week. In today's video, I want to go through a great talk by Lejjy Gafour. He is the CEO of Cult Food Science, and he had a great talk at the South by Southwest Festival in Austin, Texas a couple weeks ago. If you haven't seen it yet, links also in the description. But before, I just want to show a really cool update from Ohio Valley. We had a video on them a number of videos ago, a week ago. They're showing their first version of their cultivated meat product. If you want to check out the full talk, which is a great talk, link is up above. Really cool update from them. Let's get into the talk by Lejjy.
Let's talk about food. All right.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
All right, Lejjy, I'm going to let you give your background. We've known each other a couple years now. This is a great way for us to continue our conversations. Tell the folks here first a little bit about Cult Food Science, how y'all started, how y'all might have changed since you started, because a lot of things have happened the last 2 years, and then, where you are now.
Yes, thank you. So my name is Lejjy Gafour. I'm CEO of Cult Food Science. So Cult Food Science is actually one of the first publicly traded companies based in North America focused on the cell-based space. So that includes cellular agriculture and precision fermentation. So for those that might not be familiar, cellular agriculture, a lot of people probably heard of it as like lab-grown meat. Frankenfood. But the process itself, you're taking a cell sample from something like a cow, putting it into a bioreactor, which is basically a big beer brewing tank, except for meat. And what you get out of it is actually the exact same meat you would get if you needed to slaughter cattle, but without the animal. Huge impact of that is then you're getting the same results with abstracted from the land. So massively reduced need for land and water use, and thus changing how it impacts the climate. So when Cult Food Science first started, it was really recognizing in the publicly traded aspect that consumers and people in general want to be able to actually invest in things that they see as problems, that they wanted a choice in it. If you go to buy a ETF, for example, or a mutual fund, maybe from your favorite bank, you don't exactly get to select what's in there. 90% of the time you're going to have things in there you might not personally align with, whether it's related to energy or climate. So we first started as a recognition to give everyday people the ability to put investment in stuff they actually care about, because usually you have to be an accredited investor, which means you're very rich, which is not the majority of people to move things forward. And now from that, we pivoted to really focusing on being able to create not just these investment opportunities, but new products and companies in this frontier of tech, which is very real today.
If you're new to this channel, this is why I'm bullish on Cult, because they've pivoted to actually being more than just a VC firm. When I first invested, they were more or less just a VC firm, but they had some signals that they would be doing more. And what I don't like about them being just a VC firm is that traditionally VC firms do not trade well at all on the stock market. They are pretty flat, and it's just not something that really works well for a lot of different reasons. But now that they're pivoting into actually being more than a VC firm, they're a company that I want to invest in.
Yeah, and the public, like you said, the publicly traded component is really interesting because it really does open up the space to more people. It really does make it more accessible, and it makes it more people are available to support the companies that are doing amazing work in their early stages, and then be able to benefit with that when those companies are growing and maturing. So the next question that I want to talk about is like you mentioned, right? You take a cell from a cow. Most people are familiar with the idea of a lab-grown burger. I think it was a decade ago that the first one was shown. It cost like $250,000 for a burger, and the price has come down amazingly. And we can get into the how close it is to that real market availability, especially with some of the exciting things that are going to be coming to market here in the next year or two. But first, I want to talk about what's beyond beef, what is beyond pork or chicken. Like those are obvious ones folks might have heard of. What are some of the other things where cultivated ingredients, cultivated products are going to be in our lives in the food that we eat or the products that we use?
Yeah, and there's many people in here that'll be familiar with it, but like if you take something like a cow, none of that is wasted, and it's not all just food. When you walk into a grocery store, uh, merchandising aside, most of it is shells, dry goods, auxiliary products, and a lot of those contain animal products. I always refer to collagen as an easy example. Collagen, gelatin, that is in an insane number of things, everything from medicine to candy, marshmallows, you name it, coloring. There's so many things that are animal derived that you don't even think about that most people buy, and it'll be impacted by these technologies. In our portfolio, we have a company who's working on gelatin, honey, chocolate, coffee, which is an interesting one because I would like
Compound
coffee.
foods.
Yeah, I would like coffee to not run out. And that might be one of the only ways to get certain types in the future, which is a whole nother conversation. But it is much wider than meats, even down to materials. There's larger automotive firms looking at this to be able to replace how they traditionally get materials through this biotechnology that is happening out in a. It's been happening for some time, but now it's really starting to come out in products.
A replacement for plastic would probably be the thing I'm most excited about.
Yeah, and I think for folks in the room that are still kind of new to this idea, which I feel like I am scratching the surface or the top of that iceberg, and there's all this space underneath. It's really cool to see companies that are exploring these things that are a little bit outside. But when we think about it, right, like how many people use honey? A massive amount. How many people eat chocolate, eat coffee, right? Those are products that, as our climate changes, as our environment changes, as agricultural bans where growing seasons are shifting, these kinds of technologies are going to be incredibly important for ensuring that products aren't just available to the very few people who can afford the highest prices. Yeah, jump in.
Oh, I was going to jump in on that. The chocolate side is a good example with one of our companies, California Culture, that we're invested in, where, especially from an ethical perspective, the practices for, I will say, large volume chocolate, there's lots of producers that are producing it privately and ethically, but for the majority of it globally, it's not ethical at all. Whether it's impacting people, children, deforestation, and climate,
Well,
or it
and not
enables more ethical production practices through
not
these
just ethical,
technologies.
right? Safe. And we've seen some recent reports in the news about some of the things that can get into our food supply from our soil, from our water. And so being able to have a way to mitigate that.
Yes, huge difference because all this happens in a very controlled system by necessity. Because you're doing it in a system of bioreactors, it's very scientifically and test driven, that you end up not introducing a lot of the stuff that is can be harmful for the end consumer in the product. Because if it's in there while you're growing it or making it, you actually don't end up with any product at all. So it's almost a self-reinforcing to avoid things that may be harmful that we're used to seeing.
Well, and so, right, like you said, these are things that are produced in an environment that's very intentionally very closed for those reasons, for its efficacy. Do you see that as technology that we'll be leveraging as we're looking beyond our planet and thinking about how can we produce materials in enclosed environments where we are on our moon, on Mars, and we don't have access to all those resources? We have sunlight and dirt. Like that's our starting point.
Yeah, yeah, and the same ideas, for unfortunate reasons, are starting to apply on Earth. How do we modularize ways to produce food when the climate is actually there's no way at all for it to be good for anything living. Especially protein production could be a huge challenge if there's cultures that are used to raising cattle, less so in North America, but it can be impossible now in some places, and that same thing applies to frontier, like in space modularization. My dream scenario, and something I'm hoping to work on at Cult as well, is eventually you'll be able to have a, a vertical farm, but have it mean much more than just fruits and vegetables. That the farm on the corner of your street includes the grocery store and where it's produced, and instead of it having to be shipped hundreds of kilometers or miles, sorry, I'm from Canada, to go to buy it, that is produced in your neighborhood, and you can get it all in the same place, and production can be scaled up and down in a more networked manner, which is a very different method for food security and production than what's possible today.
This is so important. If you haven't heard the term food desert before, go look it up because it is a huge issue in most of North America and one of the biggest issues we currently have with our food system. So, if we can move all production locally, we could solve a lot of those issues. Also, great book if you're interested in vertical farming. This came out back in 2010, but still very prescient. And there's tons of great vertical farming companies that are popping up all over. And again, Singapore is the leader in this space, so can't wait to check that out when I go visit.
Yeah, no, I love it, especially following the conversations that we've heard this morning about the importance of having localized methods of production, having agricultural models that are in the hands of people in communities versus relying exclusively on products and food that are shipped into communities. So, that makes me think about all of the sort of ripple effects. And we've talked a lot about how our food system is a lot of interconnections. That leads into issues with mobility and a variety of other resource efficiencies. But I also don't want to just like paint a one-sided picture of this. There's also been some news recently. If you read about cellular agriculture and cultivated agriculture, there's a lot of companies that have had a lot of hype, and there's some issues that are bottlenecks for the industry that maybe haven't been discussed as openly. Can you talk to some of those things?
Yeah. Bottlenecks with something like, I would describe it as hard tech, is interesting because you could ask the same question of how do you build a chip? Like, it's ubiquitous, but if you ask me to build a new computer chip, I'd be like, from my familiarity, those factories are like billions of dollars. It's complex, and the bottlenecks can tend to shift in your production as you start to grow. The interesting part is a lot of what it was traditionally seen as bottlenecks in the industry almost don't exist anymore. It used to be talked about the food that you have to feed the cells was too expensive. So growth media is usually what it's called. It was insanely expensive. And what happened in response is there's 20, 30 companies, they're like, okay, we'll figure this out. And over the course of the last few years, that's really what's happened is every time as a bottleneck is propped up, a company has shown or research has been there, sometimes already for a decade, that someone picked it up to provide a solution for it. And it is really about scaling up and continue to address those constraints as they come up. I am a big proponent of being as open as possible as well with this. Started a few projects with New Harvest and Lejjy Ventures on this open cell ag project to make stronger foundations for open knowledge on those bottlenecks.
Yeah, I love that.
Not just for new entrepreneurs, but also for the general public. Because papers can be really impenetrable. What is the most plain way we can put the information out that everyone can benefit from? Because it helps our investments as well. If companies are coming to us, that then we're like, oh, we don't have to spend a year figuring this out. We can just follow this. It's already been validated, is a huge advantage.
Yeah, that's a huge time saving, huge cost saving. Well, and we were talking earlier about water, and so I know that's one of the things that you're especially interested in. It's one of the conversations we'll have later today, talking about more sustainable water agriculture. What is water? How does that play into this when we're thinking about efficiency?
Yeah, I do definitely believe that food is power, and I look at food and all this, even with how we work with our companies, as food is infrastructure as well. Um, Usually people think about like fiber for internet, Common thing, everyone needs it these days, but at the same time, here in North America, how we treat our water and how we sell it and commoditize it and how that relates to food isn't exactly treated necessarily as something that we should actually protect and work together on. And we could suffer some very huge impacts from that. And that being able to, in the case of cellular agriculture, actually address and control how much water we may use, how we can impact that safely. It's actually really important, and also making sure that we're not ending up in the same state as just being another large monolith that's just pulling down the water supply. Because if we run into that, then we're all in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I want to shift gears a little bit because one of the other things that we talk about at the Future Food a lot is food access and food justice and food security. And one of the things that we've really seen from our team to our speakers to our partners is that hunger is something that all of us can experience. Not everyone has, but everyone can. And I think I'd love for you to talk about how your personal experience with food has really shaped the way that that you are bringing some of your values into the work you do with cult food science, because we had a really great conversation about this last night.
Yes, this is something that most people don't even think about me until they ask. I don't think about it either as much as possible sometimes. But I'm running a publicly traded biotechnology platform, but actually quit going to school in high school. Like I'm mostly self-taught. I grew up super poor on a farm in southern Alberta, poor enough that we were just trying to grow what we could to eat. It was not profitable whatsoever. It was the exact opposite. So there were weeks of actual not eating. Like I can't drink powdered milk anymore. To use a specific example, because there'd be weeks where that's all it was powdered milk and something else you mix into it, and that doesn't really leave you, especially after like 20 years of being in that. And so that term of like food security, whenever I hear that, I can think, well, that actually starving really sucks and it changes your behavior. And that aspect of it and the potential in the technology to try to create more accessible in the long run and modular ways of producing food is really important to me. We bring forward to when we look at how to invest, how we're actually designing infrastructure. Use the word infrastructure and mean like not just literal like pipes and tubes, but also how are we designing our investments? What supports are we providing the companies? How are we going to actually engage with end customers to make sure that it actually is inching towards 1% of the time in some cases, so that I can do the most that I can to make sure more people didn't suffer as I did. And I mention this too to people because a lot of people in hard tech, when it's really complex, bio is complex, especially when you're younger, you can feel like this is impossible for you. Even when you're in it, it can still feel like it's impossible sometimes. But there's there is a pathway in that you don't actually have to let your own experience with food insecurity or what may have happened that is not permanent, because it can actually be very powerful. Because then you know how it actually happens. You're not coming at it from a pure venture, I'm going to make millions of dollars perspective, but you're coming at it and actually knowing how food can impact people, and that can go a long way in shaping your everyday work with that. So I'd encourage anyone who feels like they can't to question that and know that they can actually move forward in something like cellular agriculture to have a greater impact.
I love that. The idea of tempering the way that someone is approaching it, like you said, right? If you are thinking about how a company you're going to invest in is going to be building that long-term infrastructure, going to be building something that is impactful and beneficial for the communities that it works in, versus someone who may not have ever had that experience and isn't able to wrap their head around those negative experiences, that can be a huge change in deciding which companies are getting dollars, which companies are getting investments. And I think we've seen over and over, especially the last few years, that when you have people who have no way to relate to the vast majority of the population, and we throw lots and lots of money at them, then they burn a lot of money, and then they get forgiven and they get more money again. So how can we break that cycle by bringing this conversation to light and saying, look, there are so many people up on the stage, people in this audience, people at home who know what it's like to be hungry, and who know what it's like to have family members who are worried about food. That is a huge thing for us to be able to talk about publicly, to be able to talk about together and be vulnerable and really destigmatize that conversation, because it's not your fault if you're hungry. It is all of our fault if any of us are hungry. So I think that's anytime we have someone who's able to share that kind of perspective, I think it benefits everyone, like you said, right? Because you can see that that doesn't hold you back. That's not something that is inhibiting.
Yes, and I will be very direct in unintentionally calling out so people, if you end up in tech and food on the high end, you will still run across people that still really fervently believe the opposite. That people who don't have access to food or starving or just not in a good position, that it is legitimately their fault, and then that comes through in how they treat their investments. But those people are wrong.
Wrong.
To put it directly.
100%.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
If you've ever lived in a town or been to a town with no grocery store and the nearest one is like an hour's drive away, this is starting to get at the idea of what a food desert is.
So this is great, and I want to make sure that we, in the last couple minutes that we have here, let's talk about some of the things. You've mentioned infrastructure, you've mentioned some of the technologies. Let's talk about some of the things that you are very excited about on the horizon. Maybe some of the things that you see as, I really like that you talked about having more publicly accessible information. As we have more resources like that, then what does that lead to?
Yeah, there's a few things. On my side at Cult, very excited about the infrastructure that we're putting together to support early stage companies, because it can be very hard in bio, especially if you're an entrepreneur that's pitching. And this was mentioned in multiple talks yesterday, word of CapEx is like a dirty word if you're looking for investment. You're supposed to like magically be able to get millions of dollars of infrastructure without spending investors' money somehow. So one thing that we've been doing at Cult is creating cost-neutral infrastructure as much as possible to get through this early stage valley of death for new entrepreneurs or founders, because even the most basic equipment in this industry can be hundreds of thousands of dollars, but you don't need to just own it for yourself. Multiple people can use it. So creating shared infrastructure that's cost neutral for early stage food tech and biotech, as much as we're started this in Canada, working our way across the east coast of the United States first with like willing partners who have this infrastructure to be able to provide access to these early stage companies. So then when they're going to pitch, they're already past the milestones that then they might have to scramble for and even push the limit on, because there's a lot of incentives if you're an entrepreneur to push what may or may not be true to close that check.
Push reality.
Yeah, because you're encouraged to do so, and you'll even have some capital that will try to convince you to do that. But being able to build in a disciplined manner with common infrastructure is something that we're working on right now, and I'm really excited about. I'm also excited about products in this space going to be available to the general public in the next year or two. Cult will have products for demoing and testing in the near term, but in general, there will be products available in the US very soon from other companies outside of Cult. I'm being a bit vague.
Help our audience understand, why this is so exciting, because you and I are both very excited about the fact that these things are going to be available. Why is that such a big deal that they're going to even just be available?
Yes, I am very much in the belief that every single purchase of something like that. So if a product is made that's abstracted from the land, more sustainable, better environmental results, and someone doesn't have to not forced to change their behavior. They might not even be able to. They just need to go in the store and buy something. That having a more sustainable choice, a more effective choice through these technologies as a default option is huge. Every purchase adds up towards that. It's cumulative. It adds up towards that goal. It's not actually a big bang. That more and more products that become available, the better impact it will have as an industry towards these goals that we want to get from a sustainability perspective to impact climate change and to be able to actually have people taste it and experience it, because
Yes.
that's when it'll really kick off the belief. It's always hard to believe until you have it in your hand and you get to taste it, and then everything changes.
Absolutely. And a lot of these products, it is a very long and complicated process to get these kinds of things to market because it's such a new and novel thing. Well, so then for folks that are interested in learning more about this, can you recommend some good resources if they want to dive in from like an academic perspective, if they want to look at an NGO or a nonprofit that can help them, start at a high level, understanding what's going on in this world and how they can learn more or become involved or access resources if they're wanting to do something in the space?
Yeah, I mean, self plug, of course, at the start. Feel free to reach out to me at cultfoodscience.com, especially if you're looking to get started. Can point you to in the right direction to different institutions globally, because a lot of them just don't have it like on their website or anything like that. New Harvest is another organization based in North America. They've been around for a long time, and they have put out a lot of papers. It's a good starting point from an academic perspective, especially. And those would be the two
And
places.
for transparency,
Yeah.
you're part of that
Yes.
group. Yeah.
Yes.
But we always really enjoy being able to, as a nonprofit ourselves, we always enjoy being able to let folks know about the nonprofits that are in spaces because, to your point, nonprofits are more incentivized than a for-profit company to be able to provide a more accurate, more nuanced view because they don't have to be incentivized to be maximizing those profits. So it's always good to balance that and temper it. All right, and then lastly, what is the thing that you are most excited to taste when these kinds of things are available? Because I know there's been a couple things that have been on the menu in places like Singapore, but what are you most excited to taste? Or is there something that you've already tasted that you're excited for other people to be able to taste?
I would actually take that a step further. Is there's some projects that I've seen that are actually working on like enhanced taste. So I think about like what is the best piece of something that you ever had, and that through a lot of these techniques, which is even more frontier, won't be soon, and then that it becomes consistently like the best burger or the best salmon that you've ever had, or even beyond, which might be normally possible because it's happening in such a controlled environment to shape entirely new experiences that are actually just not common today. Like enhanced food is something that I'm really looking forward to trying.
Well, and you know me, I'm excited to try some cultivated insect proteins when that is on the
Yes.
menu.
Yes, that as well. Cultivated insect proteins, and then all these auxiliary products. Like we're working on like a candy and a drink and a bunch of other items with our portfolio companies, where it's much more than just a meat to really bring that experience across.
What do you think about vertical farming? Be interested to hear your opinions. I think it's really cool that Cult is starting to articulate what the exciting future is for our food system. I'm Chris, and we'll see you in the next video.